Come on up. Tonight, we're really privileged to have Matt Majendie, who is a sports journalist, author, and podcast host who's covered a variety of sports, including Formula One, the Olympics, tennis, golf, and boxing. In 2025, he spent the season with the Red Bull racing team, at the races, in the garage, on the pit wall, and behind the scenes at the factory. Throughout the season, he hosted the Inside Track podcast with co-host Rick Edwards to give the inside track on how the team fared and what really went down in a dramatic season, which went down to the final race, as I'm sure many of you know. Matt is the author of Nazari, Life and Death with the Big Wave Surfers as well, which was nominated for the William Hill Sportsbook of the Year award. He was also the ghostwriter of Sir Chris Hoy's book, All That Matters, which was winner of the Autobiography of the Year at the Sportsbook Award. And with Sir Chris, he is a co-host of the Sporting Misadventures podcast, where he chats to comedians about their sporting misadventures. So will you please welcome Matt Majendie? Thanks. So Matt, when did your career reporting on Formula One start?
Sort of by accident. I worked for the BBC website back years ago, 2006. I'd covered other sports before that and found myself in Melbourne after the Commonwealth Games, and someone asked me if I would do a bit of coverage of the Grand Prix while I was there, because it overlapped at the same time, and that was the sort of gateway to it, 20 years ago. So sort of by default, as many of these things seem to have happened in my career.
And I mean, it must have changed an awful lot in 20 years. I mean, it's gone absolutely massive in this era, hasn't it, of Drive to Survive in particular?
Yeah, I sort of say it's out of control, but I mean that in a nice way. Like, it is, the Drive to Survive impact is astonishing, and you see it here today, you see it in the UK, but you particularly see it in the US. I remember going to races in the US before where there was very little interest at all, and now it's erupted, and Liberty Media, the owners of Formula One, that was their big target area of the US, and it's fair to say they've cracked it, I think, pretty well.
I think they have. So when did you have the first idea about trying to embed yourself in Red Bull, and how on earth did you go about it? I mean, Formula One are the most secretive of teams in sport, and I guess that is the kind of thing that you would think many sports journalists would have tried to do it. How did you persuade them to make it happen? Yeah,
it sort of started, again, this is sort of accidental gateway to it, but it started with I worked for the Evening Standard newspaper in London for years, and I did a feature, and I pushed this idea with Red Bull. I had a pretty good relationship with Christian Horner and some of the people at the team already. This idea of inside the winning machine as a feature. So, you know, they were relentless. They were winning everything at that point. And to sort of go behind the curtain and see what that was like. And so I spent a day at the factory. I spoke to Horner, Adrian Newey, who was there then. And then there was a big team briefing, and they'd never let a journalist in before for the sort of post-team briefing back at the factory. And on the big screen came Max Verstappen to address everyone with a massive hangover, it has to be said. He said 4 gin and tonics, but I think it was probably a bit more than that. But he sounded very croaky from his Monaco home as he addressed all the team. And it was just such an amazing opportunity, an amazing experience, but it felt like I'd only just tapped the surface of it a little bit. And so I went to them with this idea of the podcast, initially as the podcast first, and then the book, and they were, I don't know, surprisingly receptive to it. Everyone went silent for a while. It took quite a while, as you say, with Formula One for it to be okay, but once it was essentially okay by Christian Horner, then away I went, and yeah. So quite a lot of pinch yourself moments during the course of the season.
I bet there was, because it wasn't, so you were embedded for the 2025 season, but it wasn't as if 2024 was a particularly quiet season, was it? So just to set it up, let's go through some of the things that happened with Red Bull in 2024.
Yeah, so I mean, it was utter turmoil in 2024. You had the situation with Christian Horner, the scandal around that, and very public infighting within the hierarchy of the team. And on top of that, there was a point where it looked like Max Verstappen might leave and join Mercedes, and we saw that then repeat itself. And so that backdrop was quite fascinating because it felt like it started this 26 season like things had settled and peace. I think I talk about it in the book at the start, that peace seemed to reign, albeit maybe a false one, or when you're winning, it's quite hard to stay cross with each other. And that was the case. So to suddenly have that gateway to that, and I really had no idea that the season would play out as it did. I feel quite lucky and blessed that it was. That 2025 happened as it was.
And they'd lost Adrian Newey as well, didn't they? So over to Aston Martin. So it really was kind of all changed.
Yeah, and Jonathan Wheatley had gone as well, which is another integral figure. It felt real change, and sort of in that period of change is always an interesting place to be embedded in as a journalist, I think.
And what were the parameters of you being there? Were there any no-go areas? Did they say you can't talk to these people, you can't cover this, you can't ask certain questions? Or did you literally have complete access?
The sort of main boundary was around technical information. They didn't want to be giving out technical information that their rivals could jump on, so some things would be okay. But I used to explain to them my brain is not big enough to understand half of what I was talking. So the engineering stuff, the real clever stuff that you're seeing, I can understand a certain degree, but the complexity is not. So some things Pierre Vacher, who's the technical director, would have to okay. But it was pretty welcoming. They gave people within the team the option that they could speak to me or not speak to me. And to start with, I think there was trepidation from some because they don't know me at all. Maybe some might have seen me around or whatever, but there's no relationship there. But then suddenly sort of you become like a piece of furniture and you're just hanging around there the whole time, and then people slowly get whittled down and talk to you. But yeah, they were every now and then, they wouldn't let you into certain briefings and things like that, which you understood. But it was a pretty open book, which is very impressive for a Formula One team.
It is, it really is. And and one of the early surprises for me was quite how big that team actually is. So obviously, Red Bull came from the remnants of Jaguar when it was a smaller team. But I mean, how many people work for Red Bull?
Yeah, so when they bought the team, it was 350, 380, something like that, which, seems a sizable enough team. But across all of Red Bull, across powertrains, because they're creating the engines, advanced technologies, all marketing, operation, etc. I think it's up to 2,000 people now. And when you go, I don't know if anyone's been to the campus, as they call it up there. When I first went there, it was just a couple of buildings, and it just gets bigger and bigger, and there's always a big giant crane hovering over, creating the latest thing to it. But it's astonishing to think, and they're very keen to push the message of, while Max Verstappen's the one doing the winning, how many people are behind that, and brilliant people as well, and just these 2,000 cogs that are all working together for the same goal when it comes to Sunday.
Yeah, no, it must be an incredible operation. So you got in close and were able to talk with Christian Horner, obviously. So he'd led the Red Bull team since its inception, 20 years before, got it at the age of 31. What did you learn about his leadership style and the way he led that team that doesn't maybe come across on TV?
I mean, I'd be interested to know people's perceptions of him, but quite often people will talk to me about, what's Christian Horner like? Because the way he is on Drive to Survive is quite a spiky, combative character, and I sort of think of him as like a pantomime villain sometimes on that TV show. But at the same time, he's playing, and he talks about it quite often, that he's playing a role to a certain degree, so he's exaggerating that, but actually he's an incredibly likeable, funny, down-to-earth person. What was the most amazing thing was how he didn't mind taking all the crap, didn't mind taking all the flack for everything around the team. He was very good for the team. So if Verstappen's done something wrong on the track, he would just take the heat for it, or whatever it was, he would take the heat for it. And that was such a key part in making the team, because everyone working there, from the highest to the lowest person, felt that he had their backs. And I thought that was really important. And it created such a tight unit, almost like a junior Formula team, this little, everyone's scrapping together, it's us against them. And sometimes the narrative, us against them with Red Bull, I don't think is is true, but it's clearly served purposes with the amount of titles and races they've won.
What is this sort of fizzy drinks company, isn't it? Not the usual sort of model for coming in there, and you know, perhaps I know they've got that sort of reputation for doing things differently and really sort of chucking everything.
Yeah, I mean they still do operationally. They are different to other teams. They act in a different way. They're very rapidly reactive. I think they're the best operationally, and by that I mean how they can adapt from the start of a weekend to the race. And you'll see that these sort of, last season was a good example, these Fridays where the car be turgid and you hear Max Verstappen over the radio complaining about brake balance and the car, you know, everything kind of wrong with it. And then suddenly they turn it around to a race win, and I find that remarkable. And I'm not saying other teams don't do that, but they seem to have an ability to adapt so much quicker than some others.
And you were saying that he had everybody's back, you know, he kind of really, but, you know, two sort of drives in, and you are kind of handed the inside story pretty early on of Liam Lawson, who had, you know, was kind of brutally, really sort of axed very, very early on. What was the atmosphere like in the team when that news dropped? So
I was in, for the China race, I was back at the factory, which was his last race. So I'd been in Australia and experienced that, and obviously that hadn't gone well for him. Spent a lot of time with him, really affable, likeable guy, seemed really, really buzzing to get, you know, stuck in, and you really felt for him and kind of will him to succeed. When you start to know these characters, you will them to succeed. And then in China, I was back in the factory in the ops room watching the race from there to get a different perspective. So I didn't really anticipate. You read the stories, you'd heard the things, the whispers, but there's so many whispers and rumours in Formula One, it's hard to know what's truthful. And then the axe came down on him, and it was really brutal. But all credit to him, he's still there, albeit at the sister team, and he's still doing a great job. He had a great performance in Monaco, and I thought that was the end game for him. You know, that you could see he was crushed by it. Yeah. You know, and trying to pick yourself up from that. But that was an interesting early chapter to the book.
It was. I'm sure he takes some pleasure from outperforming Yuki in subsequent races every now and again. The book obviously spends a lot of time talking about and looking at Max Verstappen, you know, the standout superstar of that team, and from many different perspectives as well. So whereas Drive to Survive, you're often seeing the team leaders, you're talking to just the other drivers, you get that chance to go sort of very, very deep and talk to, you know, all kinds of team members about the team and about how Max is. And he's another one who I think is misportrayed, isn't he? He has a sort of an arrogance that comes across, but maybe that's not the way the team feel about him, is it?
No, it's an interesting one. I don't know. I think maybe it's difficult when you're inside it. The perception maybe changed a bit last season because he was the underdog that came from far back and defeated to then, you know, take the championship to the final race. So I think that was different. But also in this country, he was the sort of villain because he was the rival to Lewis Hamilton, or he's a rival to Lando Norris or to George Russell. And so, you know, I'm probably guilty of this too. The media, maybe he gets portrayed that way a bit unfairly, and there are points where he can seem quite spiky, but I realise it's just honesty. A lot of people aren't always particularly honest, and what you see is what you get. And I always used to say to people in Formula One, the best way you can understand a Formula One driver, what they're like as a human being, is to talk to the mechanics, and they literally worship him. Like he can do no wrong in their eyes, and he's just it's the greatest compliment I can say about him as a human being is just how normal and humble and down to earth he is. He's just sort of, when he's with them, he's like one of the boys, and very straightforward, while superhuman almost when he does these things on the track. And there's so much warmth towards him from everyone in the team. Yeah, and
you talk about he's sort of taking the time to technically understand their jobs and what they need from him as well, so that he's sort of speaking the same language. He sort of impresses them.
He's incredibly intelligent. This is the thing you don't get. You just think this is a cold-blooded racer who'd been coaxed by his dad from the age of 4, whatever it is, in karts to be just very fast. But he's got such a good brain. Like, When I talked to him, I almost suggested, like, would he possibly be an engineer if he hadn't been? He just understands, and that's from working in the garage with his dad, and the dynometer would be going on the back of the cart, and his dad's tinkering away on the cart, and so he begins to understand it, and he wants to understand everything. There's a bit, Ben Hodgkinson, who was in charge of the powertrain, so the engines and the power unit they've created the team for this season, was blown away by the level of questions that Max Verstappen had for him. You know, he's a bright guy, but he was actually testing him and pushing him, and I don't think that's typical of all Formula One drivers.
In the book, I really love the sort of the detail, the sort of extra sort of detail that you get with people like, Jos Verstappen, his father, for example, and his upbringing and the way he sort of brought him on. Again, quite demanding. You could say sort of hot-housed a little bit in the same way as sort of Tiger Woods or the Williams sisters. Is it difficult to judge? I mean, his father was a Formula One racing driver. His mother was a racer as well. He was obviously sort of, the genetics can't have been much better, but he very much was hothouse. You tell the story of him being sent out on slick tyres on a wet day, being left behind in a service station, I think, on one occasion when he hadn't really sort of performed. I mean, how much of it do you feel is raw talent? How much was he born with, or is it just now inseparable?
It's a bit of everything, isn't it? Like genetically, Jens Button, I remember telling me that genetically this guy's got to be the best driver there is. I mean, that's great genes from both sides of very good racers, And on top of that, like, he just had a desire for it personally, but also his dad understood the mistakes he made, was able to coax him. But then his dad talks about how the sim racing side of things, which we see more and more with Verstappen, how key a thing that is for him, that was toasted off his own back, and that's given him an extra skill because it's more the eyes that he's using there. He's got the natural feel in the car, but his dad talks about by the sim racing, his son does that sort of better than everyone else, that he has the eyes there, and that's something he does himself. And Laurent Mekies, I remember telling me that he would ring Verstappen on a Monday to talk about the race or whatever, and he couldn't chat because he was in the sim, on the Monday at home. Everyone else would have been switching off, but he's still so driven to keep on improving.
It's incredible. It's incredible. 9 races in, and Horner is sacked after the British Grand Prix. After a poor run of results, sort of leaves him slightly vulnerable to all the infighting. Were you there at that Grand Prix? Because you talk about the team meeting.
So so it's interesting. Is actually I think it was the preceding race in Austria that seemed more tense. So it's at both of those, and that one seemed definitely like there was something going on. Both of the owners were there, and there was just this sort of tense feeling within everyone, almost sort of paranoia kind of thing. And I mean, that's happened before with Red Bull, that's happened before with other Formula One teams, so you don't know how much is a reality, how big that is. But at Silverstone, it didn't feel quite like that. And maybe I was not spending so much time with Horner. For example, on the Saturday night, all the drivers, everyone went round to his house for like a barbecue or whatever it was, and so there's quite a relaxed atmosphere going into the race. I wonder what, if it hadn't rained, maybe, and they'd had the decision they made on the rear wing could have been a blinder and they might have won the race, but I think that would have prolonged his removal because it was heading that way. But it's odd in that Austria felt more tense than Silverstone, even though Silverstone proved to be the kind of end of days, didn't it?
It did. It really did. And again, I love the level of detail where he was. You described the meeting where he was told, that's it, you're going to be removed, and that he sort of begged to be able to speak to the team and to sort of say his goodbyes the next morning. Can you talk a bit about that and how that worked?
Paul Monaghan talks about, who's the chief engineer of car engineering side of things, and he talks about how bold. It sort of said a lot about Horner's character, that he wanted to front up, that he wanted to talk to his senior management team, tell them, that he wanted to then tell all of his staff, because he loves them dearly. Like it's extraordinary because he's lived and breathed that team so much, and you see this, combative figure sometimes, but actually he really feels for every single person there. I remember talking to him afterwards how he felt worried how everyone would be, after he's gone, and I'm not saying they couldn't survive without him, but the sort of the goodwill he had towards everyone and the team there. And I wasn't inside that bit when he's talking to the team, but I think you've probably seen it. I think there was a clip they showed on Sky Sports, and he's quite emotional, slightly breaking down as he's talking to everyone. You see the enormity of what that meant to him.
I mean, he'd been there so long, but I was impressed by your perception that, the team loved him. The team were that was a very, very close bond that they built, and although there'd been that sort of power play the season before within the team higher up, that didn't seem to be.
No, and I think you saw that then the subsequent race in Belgium. I was at that one as well, where there was almost this slight mourning, or people were a bit lost, because the only leader they've ever known has gone. The only person they've known heading up the thing has gone, and it makes you question things. People feel vulnerable in that point, like you would be in any organisation when there's, if the boss is removed or there's redundancies, you suddenly, everyone feels a bit frail and under threat, and that was interesting, seeing how everyone was sort of treading around that, trying to navigate it, and all credit to Laurent Mekies, because he's a very different leader, but he came in and put his own stamp on the team, and it's quite remarkable. It's so weird how the book is so split in two, isn't it? You've got the first part of volatility, and then this sort of remarkable second part, which Horner still needs some credit for, but it obviously is under Laurent Mekies' leadership.
So can you talk a bit about, they're both in the same job, but obviously very, very different characters, different approaches. How did Laurent sort of strike you as a leader, and how did the atmosphere change?
Yeah, so I don't know him as well, but I got to know him. I'd known Horner for years before, and I'd never really known Laurent. I guess the most basic way of describing it is you've got Christian Horner was a racing driver, so that was his background. So he understands that bit, and you've got Laurent Mekies, who's an engineer, and that's his background. And so naturally, they have a very different approach. So that's the main point you're starting from, but also. I think I call Laurent a hugger, not a fighter, in the book, and Horner's the antithesis of that. So Horner far more combative. We'd seen him falling out with like Zach Brown, Toto Wolff, etc., those frayed relationships, whereas Mekies doesn't have that. You see there's a much warmer bond, perhaps with Toto Wolff and Zach Brown, for example. I'm not saying there's a wrong or right way to do it politically, but it's a very different approach. But where they're completely the same, and perhaps it surprised me because you see Horner's drive and competitiveness really much more on the surface. I don't think Laurent's any less driven and competitive. When he turns up for the first one, I think Pierre Vacher was saying, it's like, he felt like the team felt like they'd given up on this title number 4, and he's like, we're going to go for number 5 for Max. Why wouldn't we? And that's kind of gives everyone a lift straight away. And I think that's really where they share something.
And I must say, you write the book really well. That sort of tension as you build through the season, it's kind of fantastic. So well done for doing that. I think the thing about the book as well is you do get that sort of depth of access, and you have the time to explore some of these other characters who you wouldn't get to talk to otherwise. Was there anybody in the team that you were really glad to write about, a kind of an unsung hero where you thought, I'm really pleased to be writing about the role this person performs?
Maybe it sounds bad, but I think I preferred the unsung heroes to. I've always loved that in sport. Like I've done a lot of Olympic reporting, and these people no one tells their story, and then every 4 years suddenly we know who this taekwondo fighter is or this diver is that we wouldn't know previously, and I liked that aspect of it. Trying to pick. A favourite, I don't know. It's so hard. Maybe Paul Monaghan, because he's just such an interesting character, and he seemed to find me really tedious and stupid, and I didn't have this engineering thing. And I was thinking, God, what am I doing wrong here? And I'm reliably informed the ruder he is to you, the better he's getting on with you. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But let's say we were getting on famously then, if that's the case. But yeah, he would call me ignoramus, which he still occasionally sends on a WhatsApp message. But it's so hard to pick like favourites. The two strategists, Will Courtney, who's since gone to McLaren, Hannah Schmitz, they're really fascinating. Sort of, they do such a specific role that's so different to anyone else. Steve Knowles, who's like the liaison to the FIA and race control. That, you know, fascinating. The Calla brothers, the twins. You know, one's
the
left.
twins who were on the gun, the Hollywood role.
But even some people that didn't get, you know, properly in the book. Some of them, you know, Tom Hart, for example, one of Max Verstappen's engineers, such a likable guy. I mean, you know, the bad bit was you know, there's 2,000 of them. You can't include everyone. You have to focus on some, and you know, that's what you had to do in the end.
Yeah, no. Well, I think it is fascinating. One of the ones you talk about towards the end is Helmut Marko. Yeah. Now, you know, Helmut, for those who you've probably seen him on Drive to Survive, and if you have, he's the one usually glowering at the back of the pit, often in conversation, I would say, with Jos Verstappen or somebody else who you know is out for Horner's blood, possibly. But talk a bit about him and his background, because I like the way that you went into depth about his previous career, which I'd not really known about.
It's so funny you're talking about these different people. They're so combative, these individuals, and they all clash with each other. But I can only go on my experiences, all of which have been, these people have been really nice to me. You know, maybe it would have been more interesting if they hadn't been. But he's another case in point. He looks vaguely frightening, to be honest. When you first sort of approach him, he's got this sort of constant scowl on his face, and you're like, oh, do I call him Helmut? Do I call him Dr. Marko? What do I do when I approach him? And actually, as it turns out, he's a really funny, engaging character. And the best bit was being able to go out to Graz, where he lives, and he's got a sort of hotel empire there and amazing works of art, and see him in his natural habitat, away from the volatile world of Formula One. He's a remarkable person. You know, he's done some amazing things, and again, bit like Horner, painted often as the villain. You know, he's always one being rude about his drivers, and you know, all his remarks on TV. You know, sometimes he'd come over to us and say, I'm not allowed to talk to you this weekend, to me and a couple of other journalists. And then he just can't help himself. He starts telling you things that he's clearly not meant to. But you know, he's so responsible for bringing through like a Vettel through to a Verstappen through. You know, Mercedes could have got Verstappen in the early days. He was the one that got him. But also he built up this team for Mateschitz, his great friend, from nothing. He was the guy that took the punt on Christian Horner when no one would have done on a 30, whatever he was. I mean, incredibly young, risky, with no F1 background. He could see these things. He had a great intuition, but he's an 82-year-old man now, and I think, you know, he's done his time on the grid, and it's a shame he's not there, because as a journalist, a lot of people are heavily media trained, and they always say the sensible thing and don't go off book. So you really, really want the people that don't play by the rule book, and here's a classic example. So there's definitely disappointment among journalists of his departure.
Although he outlasted Horner in that.
Well, no, he'll, and I'm sure he'll take great joy of that. Yeah, so.
He will. You got to drive around Monaco with.
Well, sort of hold on to the seat, and yeah.
So Max Verstappen takes you on a reasonably hot lap. Is that?
Well, it ended up being two hot laps, yeah, which was extraordinary. They'd never done hot laps at Monaco. It was the first one he'd done, and you know, I just thought it would be boring for him, but he loved it, because normally he tootles around with his daughters to the shops or whatever it is. Genuinely, that's his experience, and he's allowed to go around with this Ford Mustang. You know, we hit in excess of 100 odd miles an hour, whatever it was. It's obviously much slower than they'll go in the race, but it was incredible seeing him. They'd laid new bits of tarmac, and even then he's learning stuff for the weekend. He's like, oh, there's new tarmac here, there's new tarmac there. And the whole time, someone described me as Jelly Man sitting in the car. There's a video, unfortunately, of me, and it just looks like I just can't control my head. And he looks absolutely perfect, and I'm all over the place. He was very gracious and said, well, he knew where the breaking points were, but I'm not sure that explains enough of it. And I remember thinking, I've only got limited time. I need to ask him some questions at the same time as sort of like, you know, doing...
Pulling several Gs.
Yeah, so it was an amazing experience to get to do something like that, a proper, you know, pinch yourself moment.
What is next for you after you've done you've done this incredible kind of idea has come to fruition? You've spent time doing this. Have you got an idea for another book that might also be F1, or are you going to go and explore one of these other sports?
So I don't immediately. This was, I'd say, as you said, I've done 3 books and they've all been very different. But this one was just so big because it was the whole season, and to try and write it, because I didn't know what the ending was, so no one knew what the ending was until the final lap, and there was not a lot of time to write it, so it's pretty full on. So my literary agent asked the same question this week.
Oh, did he?
And I didn't have an answer for him, so I better start thinking. So I'm open to any suggestions from anyone, but probably outside Formula One. I've got like a low attention span, so I find I skip from one sport to the next. I always like doing that. So.
Yeah. No, I was thinking that, you want something sort of combative, maybe to follow this. You could embed yourself with the sort of Iran team as it tours the US for their
that would be something.
for their football thing. Yeah. Maybe somebody else is doing that one. Yuki Tsunoda. Yes. Yuki Tsunoda. Maybe we could talk. So, appointed from the third race onwards, but you wouldn't exactly say that was a successful switch necessarily season long. How much of that do you think was they had nowhere else to go from that point, so they couldn't really make another change? And how much of it is Honda? I
think it was a close decision between the two, between Tsunoda and Lawson anyway. There was different viewpoints within the hierarchy, so I don't think it was that difficult a choice. I think also it helped that if Tsunoda came in, it quite took a few million off the cost of the Honda engine deal, so that, yes. I think maybe to the tune of 10 million. So that's obviously helpful as well. But he was a proven racer, and he showed himself as a leader for the junior team, and maybe in those first couple of races had done well too. I feel sorry for him. I think he's a brilliant driver still, really quick, but he just was up against the very best. Had that crash in Imola when he just had the upgraded floor, and never really came back from that. And I used to be accused by Rick Edwards on the podcast of being a Yuki Tsunoda apologist, because I'd always make an excuse for him. But all I can go is on. He was such a fun guy, such a nice guy to talk to, such a force of nature, and incredibly quick. But he could never quite get it all working together in one weekend, from start to finish. There were great moments, but not enough great moments. But I do think Formula One's can be a very fickle world. I don't think we've seen the last of him. I know you see him on TV at the races as the reserve driver every now and again, and I think he'll be back. I hope he'll be back. And
you were interested in the book. You talk about how he learnt his colourful language.
Yeah.
which was how?
Just from mechanics of junior teams. So he didn't speak a lot of English when he came over, and they swear a lot. I think journalists maybe swear quite a bit, but mechanics, that's a different level. So that's where his language comes from, which sort of explains some of his radio outbursts, because he knew those words a bit better than some of the other ones, I think. But he's reined it in a little bit, but not too much. It's still there a bit.
No, and I also like the nuggets. You said he had a rather surprising hero. Does anybody know who his hero or the person he most wanted to meet was? Who he then did meet, I think, which was Jason Statham.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I thought he was going to sort of say, Lewis Hamilton or Alonso or whatever growing up, but Jason Statham is his hero, and his goal is to be in the next Fast and Furious movie. Which anyway, I thought it was a joke to start with as we were having this interview, but genuinely, and he's got some time to do it. So I think that's what he'd be a quick enough driver to do it, wouldn't he?
He would be. He would be. He really would.
If he pops up, you heard it here first. Yeah.
Before we come on to your questions, I'm going to come and get some of you to ask the occasional question. You worked and wrote the book with the fantastic Sir Chris Hoy. How did that come about, and how was that to write? Because that was
difficult. Yeah. So we did this, as you mentioned, the podcast we did together, and we'd become good friends. I'd known him during his career, and we sort of had this shared love of comedy, and we got closer and closer. And I remember I was covering the Ryder Cup when it was out in Rome. Just sent him a message to say, I can't remember which guest. How are you? You still on for Wednesday at whatever time? And he goes, I don't know that I am. I just found out I've got cancer. And that's the initial conversation. And that was just after the first appointment. And so we stayed in touch, and I didn't want to intrude too much, because obviously, and then came the news of how serious it was. And so at that point, you're just trying to be a friend and send, silly messages seem to be the best way to go along. and then it came to a point where he said he wanted to document it. You know, at that point, I think when you first get news like that, you feel like it's all imminent. You know, that sort of game over, etc. That he wanted to document that for his family, and so I said I'd happily do that, and then that turned into a book, and it was a real honour to be asked to do it. But it was a very difficult thing to do because I felt like I was, you know, he was having to talk about some incredibly raw things, and I felt like I was torturing him as we'd sit down to these conversations. But all credit to him, and they're difficult interviews to listen back to now. But all credit to him. I don't know if people have read it at all, but it is an unbelievably positive book, bearing in mind what he has encountered and him and his wife have encountered. They are astonishing human beings, and he's totally changed, I think, my perspective on life. I've always think I'm quite an optimistic person, but he's given me greater optimism with how he sees the world, even with, you know, what he's had to encounter.
Yeah, it's an incredibly inspiring figure, and that book, you know, even from the publishing and sort of book world, that seemed to come from nowhere.
Well, that was the thing as well. I couldn't tell anybody. I had permission to talk to my wife about it because I needed to talk to somebody because you're taking on quite a lot. But, you know, that they managed to that not sort of come out in all that detail into that was amazing. And it's been such a powerful book. Like, yes, you know, genuinely, he's going to save people's lives. There's people he knows who've had their, you know, prostate check and found out they've got early stage prostate cancer they wouldn't have known about, and he keeps on banging the drum for that, and I don't think he'll ever stop, you know. But it's an amazing message, and he's raising loads of money for charity. Yeah, remarkable, even more remarkable human being than he was a remarkable cyclist.
Yeah. No, he is. He really is. Okay, I was impressed by the number of people who actually arrived in Red Bull kit. So I know there's some real fans out there, and I want to give you a chance as well to ask any question that you may be burning to ask. So is there anybody who'd like to ask a question? If you just want to raise your hand, and my colleague will come with a microphone.
Yeah, thank you for that. Really interesting. I'm not sure if this is a controversial question or not, but did they have to approve everything that you wrote? Were there things that you wanted to put in that you couldn't?
So we always talked about having editorial control. So it started with the podcast with the BBC, and it was using the interviews for that. So every now and again there would be a, can we not use that? Can we not? And sometimes there'd be a bounce back and forth situation on certain bits, but more, as I sort of was touching on before, it's about the technical side. They were very open. I mean, maybe some of the worst stuff and the more volatile stuff had happened in the season before. So I feel as a team they're very good at allowing the whole roller coaster to happen. So you can see the highest highs and the lowest lows, and that's what makes them brilliant. That you see them warts and all kind of thing.
Hi, thanks. I was just going to ask if you have much visibility of the development of the 2026 car, or if they're going through that development process or through the product management.
No, so I've not been with the team now, but the one bit I did get to experience was the powertrains element of it, which was amazing to see. You know, this place that had just been a field, they turned into a building which created the engine, which somehow the FIA believe is the fastest engine. I don't really buy that. I think there may be a bit of back and forth on that. I don't really know on the chassis side of things. You know, clearly they've been behind on that, which I don't think people thought would be the case. I think people more thought the engine and would be a bigger issue for them, but it hasn't been. Yeah, but I've not been privy to that. You know, even when you're within the team, you're not privy. You know, while I'm embedded with the team, I'd be fascinated to know from someone what percent I actually know still. You know, certain technical things that only, you know, one or two people will know or need to know basis. So there's that element. But I don't know. I think they'll improve throughout the season. We've already seen it. Last couple of races, they've shown greater pace.
You were saying in the book as well that Laura Meeks they sort of made, or the team collectively made the decision during 2025 to keep the improvements coming in, to try and keep improving that car, whereas some of the other teams at that point had taken the decision to work.
Yeah, they pushed on
year's.
much more than any other team, and that's their ethos. while there's still a chance to keep on going. But also their argument was the sort of simulation, the tooling was sort of slightly out of whack, so what they'd see in the factory wasn't correlated to what they were seeing on the track, and so part of the still going was his argument. Lauren's argument was if they keep on doing that, then they'll get an understanding of how that works for next year. But he always said they would be on the back foot as a result of it, doubly on the back foot, creating your own engine and powertrains, but also pushing right until the final race, whereas others had taken their foot off the gas. But again, that's quintessentially Red Bull, I think, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And I guess he was the team leader introducing these, but obviously these things were these were in train and,
Yeah, they go so much further back than you think, so they would have, so many of those things would have been the Horner time anyway. Not to take any credit away from him, because he's the one that's pushing the messaging and keep on drilling it into everyone to keep on going till the last race.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, were there more hands? Gentleman there? Oh, and a young gentleman here as well.
What do you make of the impact that Verstappen has on his teammates? Because lots been made about their performances relatively to him.
Yeah, I think he's crushed them mentally, because, countless. Alex Albon's a great one talking about it, who's been perhaps the most honest. He talks about like a computer game that's been up to the highest degree of any touch, and he, Verstappen could do something and Albon couldn't. He'd spin every single time. He just has a car control that seems to be the best of anyone there, and you keep on trying to look at the data constantly as a driver, naturally, and try and see, well, what's he doing there and what's he doing there, and it drives you slowly insane. I thought Perez, for much of his time, got it quite right, knew he was perhaps a degree below him, and that's no disrespect to Perez. He could beat Verstappen on a good day, particularly on a street circuit, but I think he understood that on certain tracks he was not able to match that. And I think Isaac Hadjar gets that, but I don't know. I mean, it's difficult. These drivers have, all elite sports people have these egos, and they believe they're the best of the best. They believe they can beat the best, and then they try and do it and come up second best. I mean, you see Sainz, Gasly, Albon all struggled to get, and they've all done much better. They've been brilliant drivers, and their reputations have been brilliant after that. So, yeah, perhaps don't always try and take him on, maybe, I think would be the advice.
And you said that Perez actually said that 2025 was his greatest season, possibly because he was so missed.
So Perez's reputation genuinely went up last season by not driving, which is ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah. Because two other drivers tried it and they were like, oh, I see. So, yeah, no, you were actually quite good. Yeah. So, I mean, he's quite funny with it, but there's an element of truth, certainly.
Young gentleman.
What was your favourite time moment in Red Bull?
I'm going to have to go with the Monaco lap. It's a slightly obvious one, really, but yeah, being driven around in that car around the circuit was, that was just something else. I never thought I'd experience something like that. I probably never will again, and yeah, truly incredible. Even though I look ridiculous when I watch it back, but it was good. It was good at the time.
Is it startling being in that bubble, being in such close proximity to some of these F1 drivers and the attention that they get on a kind of race day?
Yeah, I think Mexico was the greatest example. I don't know, every nationality is a little bit different. They don't seem to have a great concern for personal space when it comes to the drivers. So they're sort of being bundled, arms around them, left, right, and centre. And that wouldn't be what I'd want. A lot of the drivers have security detail. And Verstappen's and Hamilton's, Norris's get ramped up for a race like Mexico. But they're being called on the whole time, and that gets bigger and bigger. Everyone wants a selfie, wants a photograph, wants an autograph, left, right and centre. And they're very gracious. Verstappen is incredibly gracious with it, and he must, pose for thousands and sign thousands, so yeah.
I like the bit you mentioned in the book as well about the way he looks after his mother and his grandmother.
Oh, that's so sweet. I mean, really like a doting, just so sweet. And he's a proper family man, and he really is down to earth. And yeah, I think that's just another sort of truer side of him when there's no cameras on him. You see, the true him, just a lovely guy.
Sorry.
Can I just ask, over the time of your attachment to Red Bull racing, did you find, following the upheavals and departures of Christian Horner and Adrian Newey, do you feel that by season's end that was a positive thing or a negative outcome?
I'm going to describe that as the impossible question. I mean, Adrian Newey is the greatest designer in Formula One history, so that's got to be a negative. It's not necessarily he hasn't come up with the perfect car yet for Aston Martin, so you'd think that's a big miss. And Christian Horner has been, astonishing with what he's achieved, but their shared great strength, there were many, was being able to bring in brilliant people, and that's what they did countless and countless times. And there are still brilliant people there, and there's been exodus of some, and so there's sort of the Newey Horner feel is still there in the sense that these brilliant people are still working at the team. If Horner had been at the helm, I don't know how the season would have played out. I mean, it would have been less peaceful probably at the top of things. Maybe more entertaining. I don't know. It's a very good question that I do not have the answer to. But yeah. Yeah.
In a further speculation about where he might pop up again, do you have any instinct for what's next for him?
I've chatted to him and his camp a bit. He's keeping his cards close to his chest. I think he probably knows more than he's letting on. But I mean, you've read the stories of the Occho thing, the 24% buying into Alpine seemed the most obvious route, but then, and in some ways that's the easier route because he's not starting up for the ground, but then the 12th team now seems more and more like that's a potential option. But then suddenly, Liberty Media, you see them popping up at MotoGP and they own that too. And I don't know, each time I ask, it was always the Alpine route seemed to be the most likely. I haven't checked in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and it changes quickly. So I might have to come back to you on the latest answer. But yeah, I don't truly know at this stage.
Hi. Apologies in advance if I'm unintentionally stirring up a little bit of controversy. You obviously speak very highly of Christian Horner, but you also speak similarly of Red Bull as an institution having quite a strong strategic mindset and being very closed off on certain things that will maybe impact public perception. Do you feel that as a writer who came in at a arguably fairly controversial time in Christian Horner's career with sexual harassment allegations that were made against him, do you think that you were brought in on the story that was told to you was impacted by those allegations? Not so far as to say that you were doing some damage control, but do you think that any of that had an impact on you being let into the team and on the team that you were shown?
So it's a good question. So I was working so the previous season I was working as a journalist, so I wrote a lot of the stories about Horner, and I felt I was always fair and balanced about the controversy and stuff like that, and they were pretty, sometimes they weren't happy with what I'd written, but they understood I'd been fair, so I felt I was more given a gateway in the sense that I wouldn't be afraid to ask hard questions if needed. But you make a fair point, they hadn't had a great spotlight put on them in certain ways. Obviously, Max had won the title, so coming in with a podcast and to shine a light on the good parts of the team would obviously be a positive look for them, they would hope. They're all massive PR machines, and they're always about their PR, and they want the PR generally to be good. I think Red Bull are a little bit different in that, partly because of how things played out. They've seen the negative stuff, and they probably want to be in the headlines more for winning races, but people are still talking about Red Bull and excited and interested in Red Bull because of all of it, the good and the bad. And I think maybe they're not afraid for people to tell that story, but yeah, I can only go on my thing, but good question.
Previous question.
I think they felt that it had become too much Team Horner and they wanted it more back Team Red Bull. That would be my take on it. Everyone has different views. People think there are different people at play. But yeah, I personally felt that Austria felt they wanted to have more ownership and control back on the team. And you know, Horner himself would admit that he was the all-encompassing number one. Everything went to him, everything. And they tried to take off the marketing department as a first move off him, and he said, no, if you do that, find someone else to do the job. And, well, they did do that. So, yeah, it's an interesting, you know, you don't ever know fully the politics beside it, but around it. But, yeah, I think the perception in Austria was it become too much Team Horner, and they, yeah, wanted it back in their kind of hold and their control. Oh, wow, that's a good question. This is a pretty niche answer, but I'd go for sumo wrestling because I watched this amazing... I went to Japan in September for the World Athletics Championships and watched the sumo wrestling there, but then sort of disappeared into this world of it and this documentary, and there's quite a lot of controversy and things around it, and it's a very secretive world. I think, you know, they're never going to let a non-Japanese individual in to do that. But I think that would be fascinating. Maybe no one would read it, but I'd be interested. Yeah.
And you get to go to Japan. I mean, what's not so like there?
Yeah, no, it's a great country. Yeah.
Is there somebody that you had a perception of going before going and meeting the team that changed whilst you were with the team?
That's a good question. I think probably Verstappen is the greatest example. You know, I'd had some interviews before with him that I thought were okay, but sometimes a bit spiky. So I've definitely changed my view on him, that he's more brilliant perhaps than I thought with the stuff behind the scenes and as he is as a human being. But maybe all of them, like maybe everyone, because as you get to know somebody, you see them a bit more truly and less guarded. And yeah, I think he's probably the most, but yeah, I would say almost everyone. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Did it reach a stage of you being there where they forgot that you were a journalist, or maybe even you forgot you were a journalist and that you felt like you were part of the team?
No, I don't think so. I think I always made it clear like I had to be editorial independent and separate, and I think they got that. Yeah, I think everyone knew. So that, yeah, maybe there was warmth, but there was always a little bit of distance because there just had to be. Otherwise, you just can't do it properly. Otherwise, it just becomes a puff piece. I mean, I think the book paints them in a very positive light because that's just the reality of that. That's what I've seen. But I think you need to keep the independence, definitely.
And have any of them actually contacted you post the book and said they enjoyed it or they took any issue with it?
I've not had any negatives yet. I've had a few people feedback they got the book, and some people have liked it, but there's bound to be bits that people don't like. It's normally just like the tiniest turn of phrase or little thing that people take umbrage with, but I will accept that when it comes my way. So the first, I remember early days of doing it, I went to a Mercedes press conference and the guy running it said, "Oh, out, you're the Red Bull person," but he was only joking. So they understand that as a journalist, I've been doing, the sport for a longer period of time, and they can understand that I will still keep on doing that. So I don't think that changed. Maybe it was harder to get certain interviews that might have been in the past. I don't know, but I didn't find a great change. I thought they were still quite welcoming to me, but yeah, maybe we'd have to ask them.
Did you walk away with any killer Red Bull memento? I can see lots of people here with kind of tops and things like that. Was there anything that you managed to blag during the course of a year that you thought, okay, that's a bit more special?
No, I didn't. It's not really. That was about keeping the independent
Was
bits.
it?
Yeah, I think I,
Couldn't be
yeah. Or no one offered me it anyway.
Well, you mentioned Marco, for example, had lots of helmets in all of his hotels.
But they're signed for him from drivers. But yeah, it was interesting that he didn't choose to keep them himself. He has them listed around other places that he doesn't need the sort of memorabilia. It's in my head as well, like it is for Helmut Marko, just the memories of it.
Fantastic. Okay. I'm not seeing any more hands, so I think we'll close it there. You are going to sign for us in a second. Matt is going to be over on the table over here. If you haven't already done so, you can buy the book from us at the front there. It's £22. We knock £3 of your money off, so it's £19 to you. I've got card payment facilities there as well. So do come and get them signed at the front there. It's been really fascinating, and you're a fantastic writer and deservedly getting these sort of awards for your sports writing. So whatever you do next, I hope you'll come back and.
Who knows? We've got any ideas? If you've got any ideas, let me know.
But for now, will you join me in thanking Matt Majendie?